Here you go for your stage 34 guide. First thing that we want to make sure that we're aware of is the difference between a deponent and a regular verb. So here, when we took a little bit of a practice quiz, we had some infinitives like loqui, extinqui, excipere, moeri. These are the kinds of words that you're going to be looking at to determine whether or not it's deponent or not. We made a list of these. Make sure that you go back and you look at that list and you're aware of which words are going to be deponents. And if you know which ones are going to be deponents, you shouldn't have an issue. Of this list right here, the only one that's deponent is loqui. So we would translate loqui as to speak, even though it has a passive form. Extinqui, well, that is first person, singular, and perfect, so I would choose I destroy. Even though it ends in I, looks kind of funny, but remember I can also be the perfect first person. Number 3, excipere, that is a regular infinitive, it is to receive. Moeri is passive voice, it is not a deponent, it has a passive form, so I need to be using be and then an ed, so I choose to be moved. I need to be able to go through this and pick out which ones are deponents. In this case, loqui. Here's a couple more if you want to look at them and decide which ones you think are deponents and which ones are not. So here I've given you the correct answers and I've given you the first and second principal parts because that's how I can tell if something's a deponent. Number 1, progredior is a deponent. Progredior, progredi are the two principal parts I would see in the back of the book. Because they are in passive form, I know it's a deponent. Number 2, no, not a deponent, comes from deleo, delera. When it has that normal form, it has an active form, deleo and delera, then it's going to be a regular verb. Cogitare, same thing, cogito, cogitare, those are normal verbs. Conatus comes from conor, canari, that is passive form. I have deponent. Loqui comes from locor and loqui. Those are passive as well. So passive form equals deponent. Here is a list of deponent verbs that you will see. Hopefully you can see them. Some of the ones that are on here are first, some are second, some are third, and some are fourth. I've labeled them for you. There are some patterns here that are fairly obvious. For example, we have these here that all have the gredior part. So if I remember gredior, gredi, gressus, then anything that has gredior in it is going to have those same principal parts. Sequor will be used in the same manner. You'll have in sequor, e-sequor, you'll have sequor being used in the same way. So here's a list of them. If you want to start memorizing all of them, the ones that you need to know are the ones that I've highlighted here. These are the ones that we've either seen or are going to see very quickly. So conor, portor, moror, locor, proficuscor, agredior, congredior, egredior, progredior, sequor, noscor, revertor, and virior. Knowing what they mean and knowing that they're always going to have a passive form will help us out on this next test. Next, I have subjunctive clauses. We have seen these for like the last 12 tests, shouldn't be an issue. Here's a list of some of the things that we've done in the past, same things, part of a negative clause, part of a purpose clause, I should say of, not or. Well, it looks like I have negative purpose clause up there twice, but that's all right. Purpose clause, we need a result clause, indirect commands, indirect questions. Make sure that you're aware of all of your participles. I did not put on there a future passive participle, but include that as well. Here is a purpose clause. He went home so that he could see his dad. In this case, Witteret is our imperfect subjunctive. I'm using the subjunctive because I need a purpose clause. And to make it negative, I'm going to take away this oot. I'm going to replace it with a nay. Now I have a negative purpose clause. That's important because oot is positive, nay is negative for purpose clauses. But a result clause will also use oot in its positive form, but as you can see here in red, it also uses tote. So he has so many children that the house is full. In this case, key is the so word, tote. It has to have a so word to be a result clause. When I turn it into a negative result clause, I use oot non instead of oot. Here I have, he has so many wives, change that to an es, he has so many wives that he is not happy. The result of him having wives is his unhappiness, so I use the so word tote plus oot non to make it negative. So a negative purpose clause, we use nay, negative result clause, oot non. An indirect command also uses oot. It needs a verb of mental action or command word like ubit. It can be any mental action though. It also uses oot. But instead of the a-oot, I will use the subjunctive irit. So these reds are what I need in order to have an indirect command. I have to have mental action, I have to have oot, and I have to have a subjunctive. So here I have, he orders them to go home. If I want to turn it into a negative, then I put oot non. He orders them not to go home. Indirect question will also use a mental action verb or an asking verb like rogot. It needs a question word like quis, who, and then it still needs a subjunctive like esset. So here I have, he asked, who is there? If I want to create a negative for an indirect question, I simply add non to the question. Now it says, he asked, who is not there? Next is participle identification. We've already kind of talked about this. This is knowing the difference between a participle that is active, a participle that is passive, and a participle that is deponent. In these first three right here, 1, 2, and 3, I've given you an example of both. I've given you a perfect active infinitive with damnare, so I translate it as to damn. I've given you a deponent in canare. I'm still going to translate it as active and present, so to try. And then I've given you the passive puniri, which is to be punished. So I have, number 1, a present active infinitive, number 2, a present active infinitive, even though it looks passive, and then number 3, a present passive infinitive. There's a lot of those on the test where you have to translate these types of infinitives and determine whether or not it's passive or deponent, so I translate it as active, or active, like damnare. Again, on your test, they're going to try to trick you like I did on your quiz with extinci. Extinci is not an infinitive. It is a perfect first-person verb. So I would translate it as I destroy. Locally is a deponent, so I translate it as present active, to speak. Excipra, number 3, is present active, so I translate it as to receive. Mawari is not a deponent verb. It is in a passive form, so I translate it as be, to be moved. And then winkra is in the active form, so to conquer. There's like 10 of these just like this, and they're going to try to trick you with a few of those first person singular perfects. So make sure that you know what is a deponent and what is not a deponent. Participle identification, we went over that today. You have these participles that you're going to have to be aware of. Present active participle. We do not have a present passive participle. We do have a perfect active participle. It will look just like the perfect passive, except for it comes from a deponent. This one comes from conor. Conatus is a perfect active. Our future active participle is us, and our future passive is us. So the reds are what create that particular participle. The green is the stem that it comes from. So present tense comes from ama, which is the present stem. The futures come from amat, which is that fourth principal part. Remember we talked about how those flip. We should be using, since it's active, we really should be using ama, but we don't because it's Latin and stupid. The future passive should use the passive amatus, but it doesn't. It uses ama, the present. Just remember that the NDUS is there. Gerundive use, remember that when we're using that future passive participle, or that gerundive, that ND must be, we're probably going to get some sort of obligation. That's pretty consistent. Case usage. There's a question or two about cases. If it's nominative, it's probably the subject. It could also be the predicate, nominative, that kind of stuff. Genitive possession, dative indirect object, or object of a special verb. The accusative is going to be the direct object or object of a preposition. Ablative is going to be the object of a preposition. Ablative translations, only worried about the ones that do not have a preposition. If you see a preposition with the ablative, you should not have a problem with it. However, some do not have a preposition with them. The two that we've been using most are the ablative of means. In this case, Manu me wabarawit, he hit me with his hand. Manu is the object that was used, or the thing that was used to achieve the verb, to hit. What did he hit me with? With the hand. A time, nocte media. Remember, ablative of time is a specific point in time, in the middle of the night, or at midnight. I arrived home. A good rule of thumb when you see an ablative by itself and it does not deal with time is to translate it as by or with. Now, whether or not you figure out that it is an ablative of means or not, that's beside the point. The translation by or with should get you there. No, nay, num, and nay, those are the introductory yes or no questions. No, nay is expected yes. Surely this happened, didn't it? Num is expected no. Surely this did not happen, did it? And then nay is I don't know if it's yes or no. Ablative absolute. The ablative absolute is going to have an ablative noun and an ablative perfect passive participle, or a perfect or present active participle, either one. Here I use the perfect passive dato, and I have the sign having been given, they proceeded. Remember that these ablative absolutes can still have prepositional phrases in them. They don't always look just like this. As you can see here, I put nocte media inside that ablative absolute, so here I have the sign having been given at midnight, they proceeded. So I can still have stuff in between those two, but typically you're going to have the noun first and then the participle last. Here I gave you an example of using the present active participle nocte propinquante as the ablative absolute. So with the night approaching, he went home. Make sure that when you have the present active participle that you translate it as active. Night is going to be doing the action here. Night is approaching. As night was approaching, he went home. When night was approaching, he went home. Do not say, night having been approached. That's wrong. Don't make it passive. Make sure you translate it as active. Also, it's important to remember that the present tense, like in this case, aprimquante, if I don't translate it literally, the night approaching, then I need to make sure that the tense that I use is the same as the main verb. In this case, iit is perfect tense. So I need to translate aprimquante and propinquante in the past tense. Either the imperfect or the perfect will work, but I need to make sure that it happens at the same time. I would translate this as night was approaching, he went home. That's how I would translate that. So make sure that if the verb is in the perfect tense or in the imperfect tense, that you translate that present participle in the past tense. So present tense equals the same time as the main verb when I'm dealing with participles. That's on your test, by the way. The same can be said whenever I use the perfect passive participle. When I use the perfect passive participle, the action happens before the main verb. So in signo nocto medio dato, I need to translate that as pluperfect. Unless I translate it literally, the sign having been given at midnight, I translate it as pluperfect. After the sign had been given at midnight, they proceeded. Pluperfect because the perfect tense happens before the main verb, which is in the past tense already. So a participle that is in the present tense is happening at the same time as the main verb. A participle that is in the perfect tense is happening before the main verb. Future more vivid conditions, just want to make sure that you know how to translate the future perfect when you get a condition. For example, in this one I have amawerit. If I do not put it in this condition beginning with C, amawerit is translated as he will have loved. In this case, I translate this future more vivid condition as if he loves me, he will come. I realize that the tense is kind of different, but it's just something that we have to know, that if I have the future perfect amawerit and I'm using it in a condition that starts with C, I use it in a condition with the future, maniat, then I need to translate it like we would in English as the present tense. This is one of those things where Latin and English do not translate well together. The literal translation of this is, if he will have loved me, he will come. But we would translate it as, if he loves me, he will come. I would avoid the literal translation because it sounds awkward. So I'm going to use the present tense. If he loves me, he will come. Infinitive identification already did. Translating verbs, identifying the person and the tense, as well as whether or not it's the deponent verb. Let's look at some of those. On 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, I have mixed in some deponents, I have mixed in some regular verbs, and I've mixed in some of the passive forms. So go through there and see if you can get the right answers. As you can see here, I have a regular verb, in damn not been many, so you will be damned. That's just regular passive voice. Future tense, bi is the future. I have you will be taught, again, passive voice. That ris is the passive voice. The be changes, don't know why, but that's future. Make sure you're aware of that. Puniri is the passive infinitive, so to be punished. We haven't had a deponent yet. Puniris, again, E-R-I-S. The sign of the future is E. Do not confuse the E-R-I-S with the future perfect. The difference is we are not using the perfect stem. The future perfect of punio is puniveris. It has that V in there because we're using the perfect stem. When you use the present stem like this, the sign of the future is E. We added I-R-I-S. We get you will be punished. The loquitur is the only deponent. The sign of the future is E. He will speak. We haven't really talked about the docaberas. I want to look at that real quickly. For the first and second conjugations, this is what I would expect for my future passive. Bor, biris, bitor, bimor, bimini, and buntor. Latin does not like biris, B-I-R-I-S. So it takes it out and it adds B-E-R-I-S. I don't think they did this just to confuse you with the future perfect, but it does look, because of the E-R-I-S, it does look like it's the future perfect. It is not, because it doesn't use the perfect stem. The future perfect would look like this, docuris. It does have a clue in that U. It also comes from the perfect stem, docui. Make sure that whenever you identify something as future perfect, that it has one of those clues, or that it comes from that perfect stem. Characters. Okay, Asclepiadus. He is the doctor that Domitia was looking for to find a remedy for Latella, who was supposed to be sick, but it was just a trap. Shionchi was the slave girl of Domitia. Domitia, of course, she's the wife of the emperor. She's the one who is ultimately expelled from Italy. Domitian is the emperor. He is the one who gave, Domitian, after everything happens, gives this wonderful spectacle. I think that's pretty funny. My wife gets, abandoned, or exiled, and I throw a big party. Ephrodiphus is the freedman who he basically gives this spectacle for, because he believes that Epaphroditus is the one who had the plan that Saulius came up with. Haderus. Haderus was a man, he was absent from his house when all this was happening. Remember, he's kind of worried that he's going to come back before they fix the house that was destroyed. Meropenus is he's like the little guy that was promised never to do anything with his pipes. He broke his pipes. He was very upset with the death of Paris. So he broke his pipe and said, I'm not going to do anything until I see justice. Paris, of course, he is the guy who ultimately falls from the roof and his head is taken off because he gets caught. Slavius, also known as Saulius. There we go, there's Saulius. He's the one who came up with a plan to catch Paris with Domitia. And then Latella is the one who's supposed to be sick, but she's not home. That's the wife of Haderus. She's supposed to be sick, but, well, she's not. Make sure you know the definition of these English words. Exhort is to urge by strong argument. Imminent is something that is about to occur. Concomitant is an accompanying state. Pendant is something suspended from something else. Ingredient is something that is an element or a part of something else. Obviate is to prevent by making unnecessary. Patience is the quality of being tolerant or quality of enduring. Inconsequential is illogical or trivial. Renaissance is a rebirth or revival. Deprecate is to express disapproval. If I deprecate you, I'm belittling you. When I add an io to a Latin word, I basically am turning a verb into a noun. For recusatio, I'm refuse. That's to refuse. So if I add the tio, I have a refusal. Dubitatio, obviously to doubt. So if I turn that into io, it's uncertainty or hesitation. I'm turning it into a noun. Recitatio is a recital. Salutatio is a greeting. Regatio is a request. All right, cultural terms. Servi Caesarius. These are the slaves of Caesar. So they are slaves who worked as assistants to the emperor. Liberti Augustus. These are the freedmen of Augustus. These are freedmen who worked as assistants. Alabellus is a secretary in charge of petitions. Abipistulos is the secretary in charge of correspondence. Rationis is the secretary in charge of financial accounts. We have the Serviri Augustalis. Those are a group of freedmen appointed to look after some of the temples. Ornamenta Praeteria, that's an honorary praetorship. Manumitio is the act of freeing a slave. Libertus is a freedman. It's a title that they give to someone who's been freed. Patronus is the title that they give to a master once he has freed a slave. That's that patron-client relationship. Finally, we have cultural questions. What was it called when a slave was freed? We call that manumission. When a slave was manumitted, how was he seen differently by the state? Well, he was no longer seen as property. What was his relationship to his former master? He would have become the master's client. What rights were not bestowed upon the liberti? Well, he wouldn't be able to be in an election. He couldn't marry a senator. If she were free, she couldn't marry a senator. His children were free, though. So once the children were born, they would have all of the rights that a normal Roman citizen would have. What parts of the ex-master's name would he take on as his own? The first two names of this master he would take. The last name would be what he would normally have been called. What legal obligations did the slave have to his former master? He could do nothing to dishonor or to endanger his former master. He had to support him in elections. He had to give him some money if he needed it. And also he would will him his own property. That is, the client would will the master his property, although most of the time they didn't make them do that. How did society view the liberti? They were still former slaves. They viewed them as such. They were inferior. They were inferior in every way. Even their children, the children of freedmen, would have been looked down upon as inferior. You're not really a Roman citizen. You used to be a slave. So they were definitely inferior. There's a section on the test that's going to ask you whether or not a liberti could serve in a legion, and he could not. That would be false. Could he get married? Yes, that would be true. Could he be a candidate? No, he could not. That would be false. Could he vote? Yes, that would be true. Could he be a senator? No, not without. He could be a senator if the emperor made a special exception, but only the emperor could make him a senator. That's it. Could he make a will? Yes, that's true. Do business? Yes, that's true. Could he buy a slave? Yes, that's also true. There are 17 questions on your test that are asking you to identify these types of translations. They are written out just like this, different words, of course, but they're written out just like this. Do I know what an infinitive is? Do I know what a deponent is? Do I know what a passive voice regular verb is? They're going to try and trick you a few ways by giving you the amawi. Here it ends in I, so you're thinking, oh, it's passive infinitive. No, it's not. It's the first person perfect. I love. That should be loved. Like that. I loved. But you're going to have to do this with the infinitives, distinguishing between the infinitives, and also you're going to have to do it distinguishing between persons. They're going to try to trick you with the future, like on number 7. Eris, is that future perfect? No, Coach Trammell, it's not. It does not use the perfect stem. It uses ERI, but it does not use a perfect stem. So that's RIS at the end of the E as a sign of the future. Make sure when you see the ERI, don't assume that it is the future perfect. Look for that clue. There isn't one here. So ERI is not being used. It is the E, and then added onto the E is the RIS, making it second person singular, future. So I would use future here. You will be punished. Give you some practice here. See if you can get these right. Here are the answers. If you're not getting these answers, you may need to either ask yourself some questions, go back, look through some of the grammar, maybe show up early in the morning, I'll help you out. Here's some more practice for you. All of the, you have, he will be punished, he will lead, as night was approaching. That's that present tense being translated as the same tense as the main verb. And then we have parari, which is of course misspelled, but it's to be prepared. He ordered the dinner to be prepared. Passive infinitive. On number 7, this is one of our tricky ones. It has the ERI in there. What would it look like if it were you will have punished? If it were future perfect, what would it look like? What does it need? It needs that perfect stem. Puneveris. That's what it would look like if it were you will have punished. Hopefully I've explained this well enough to you for you to do a good job on tomorrow's test. If you have questions, feel free to group me, text me, do what you need to do. Good luck.